Proposition 8.
All right, thank you for that introduction, Aaron. Would you please?
Sure. First of all, I'd like to thank the San Fernando Valley Bar Association for putting on this forum, and Meyer, thank you for moderating what I'm sure will be an energetic and informative discussion of the issues. I'm here today representing a group called Republicans Against 8, and we're part of the broader coalition of No on 8. And as Republicans, we think we've got a unique take on this issue. Obviously, we oppose it for its obvious shortcomings, that it takes away the rights, the civil rights of California citizens, and it's blatantly discriminatory. But it also cuts against some of the core principles and ideals that we as Republicans have. We're the party of smaller, less intrusive government. We're the party of personal responsibility and personal accountability. We're the party that stands for a stronger economy and lower taxes. And Proposition 8 cuts against all of these things. It's big government social regulation on an almost Orwellian level. It seeks to give government control of the most private parts of the lives of California citizens. And by the analysis of the legislative analyst, it's going to cost California tens of millions of dollars, not in the future, but here in the near term. And that has ramifications for businesses and taxes. One other thing I'd like to point out, somewhere along the line, people have started referring to the issue of same-sex marriage and the constitutional revision that is Proposition 8 almost interchangeably. And in fact, they're quite different things, and you can and in fact should not support Proposition 8 regardless of your position on same-sex marriage, and that's something I look forward to getting into as we have our discussion.
Very well. Okay, gentlemen, you've heard the arguments opposed to Proposition 8, and we have to go for, I think one starting point would be the California Supreme Court's reasoning and why they felt that there should be no discrimination against gays getting married. They basically declared that, well, they cited the Constitution that everyone has a right to, any adult has a right to marriage as being a fundamental right in California. They then say that the substantive legal rights and attributes traditionally associated with marriage are so integral to individual liberty and personal autonomy. So the two major platforms there of individual liberty and autonomy, the right to choose who you want to associate with and who to be married. So the question is, how would you address the issues that have been raised by those opposed to Proposition 8 that you just heard, and the Supreme Court's decision as well?
Good question. So let me start on a couple of points. Equality, which is an interesting term, would imply that for some reason gays and homosexuals would not be equal if they were not allowed to marry. Homosexuals, gays, lesbians have every possible equality under the provision of the law currently as domestic partners. There is nothing that I'm aware of that they don't currently have at their disposal under the existing laws of the state of California. So I think the equality issue gets a little thin on that argument. The other issue that I thought Aaron interestingly brought up was the issue of race. Men and women are inherently different. They're biologically different. One could argue that emotionally there are differences. There are basic inherent differences between men and women. The race issue is interesting because blacks, whites, yellows, any color you can think of are inherently the same. And so the racial issues, while very valid, are applicable on the subject of race. Those same arguments don't cut on the subject of same-gender marriage because of the inherent differences between men and women. We accord that all people should be treated in an equal manner, but marriage, by definition, is not an equality equation. Men and women are different. Men and women have different functions. Men and women do things differently. Men and women have roles in family and in childbearing and child rearing that are different. And so we would argue that this is not the same as interracial marriage or race discrimination.
Wayne, could I ask you to follow up on that and perhaps discuss what is it that makes the fact that men and women are different, why should that be a distinction to prevent them from being the only ones who have the right to designate that they are married under the law of California?
Well, not quite sure I can address that question directly, except to say that we have probably a fundamental difference of opinion on a moral issue. And everybody has their moral agency. You can decide however you want to decide on various moral issues. But to go back and say that people have a constitutional right to engage in whatever self-fulfilling activity they desire to is just not the case. Government is not there to promote self-fulfillment. And so if you take that as a perspective and say, well, it would be unfair if a same-sex marriage could not occur because somehow that leaves those people unfulfilled. Unsure whether that would or wouldn't leave them unfulfilled. Don't know whether that is something that you could say arises to the level of a moral judgment that you could make on behalf of the entire state of California, or the entire nation for that matter, and impose that upon everyone as the moral judgment for what a marriage is, when historically, and for the reasons that men and women are different, that they bring something different to a family, then it becomes a little bit different question for me anyway, as to what we should allow, what we should condone, what we should tolerate, versus what is legally recognized as an institution that has stood the test of thousands of years, and where a man and a woman bring something distinct and special because they are a different gender to that family. And that's what the social evidence is. There's mountains of evidence that suggests that that's the case, even among sociologists who may be considered to be somewhat liberal.
Okay, I've heard a couple of points that I'd like you to pick up in response, and that is, one, we had the California will of the people voted on in favor of maintaining opposite-sex marriage only. It was a number of years ago. And we also heard that there are moral issues that that it seems that allowing same-sex marriage is imposing a standard that is opposite from a moral position that's been well recognized for many hundreds and hundreds of years.
Yeah, I'd like to address that. The definition of marriage has changed over time. If you look at the Bible, Jacob had 4 wives, and there are countless examples of men with multiple wives. We've obviously done away with that. And I guess it depends on how far back the other side wants to go in terms of defining traditional marriage. People used to say traditional marriage was between a man and a woman of the same race, or a man and a woman of the same faith. So the definition of marriage has changed over time. We as a society progress, and we want to continue to progress forward and not backwards. Now, one of the things that was said is that this moral judgment should not be imposed upon everyone, and I absolutely agree with that. If we were to ban same-sex marriage, we are imposing a moral judgment on everybody to say that you can only get married if you are a straight man or a straight woman. And I don't think that's right. I think if you oppose same-sex marriage, then don't get married to somebody of the same sex. I think everybody should be allowed to make that choice for themselves, and I think as a society we should be accepting and tolerant of people who may be different from us, and I think that's how you judge the character of a society.
Would you like to follow on?
Yeah, well, just a couple of points that were raised. First, with respect to the decision in 2000 that proponents of this initiative like to cite as reflecting the will of the people of California. You'll recall that that was a primary election where turnout was greatly suppressed. Al Gore had already secured the Democratic nomination, and a lot of people stayed home. As a matter of fact, George Bush and John McCain got more votes in that election than Al Gore does, and that doesn't sound like the California I live in. So I think we have to look at this in 2008 terms, not in 2000 terms. Also, it was brought up that men and women are different, and obviously we can all agree to that. Matter of fact, human beings are different. There are 5 males on this set, and we're all different people, but guess what? We're all human beings, and more importantly, we're all citizens of the state of California. And as citizens of the state of California, we are accorded basic civil rights. And as the court ruled, those civil rights, as currently laid out, entitle us to marry. And Proposition 8 would take those civil rights away from an entire group of California citizens.